Alright, a couple of people have requested that I might talk about the Tearlament deck for the new format. I do really enjoy playing it right now, so I thought, you know, why not make a video about it? Tearlament, in comparison to other decks in the past as well, we all know it has been a really powerful deck, right? It's been incredibly powerful. The ceiling was so much higher than for any other deck. But since it got slaughtered on the ban list, the consistency has suffered quite a bit. Now, we've, you know, in an effort through the last months of building Tearlament again, I have found ways to make it more consistent, and other people, of course, we've found ways to, you know, play it as consistently as possible. But the main issue of the deck has been that there were a lot of floodgates in the deck, right? We had a Rise Heart, we had Shifter, we had also Droll at the end of last format. Those were things that Tearlament could not really deal with. So in general, I would make the thesis that Tearlament usually wins the game, except for two reasons. Either you brick, right? Either you brick, you can't play at all, or your opponent has some sort of floodgate lingering effect, unfair win condition. I'm talking about cards like D-Shifter, Eraser, Droll as mentioned, maybe sometimes D-Barrier or cards like Summon Limit, cards of their nature. But in comparison to other decks, Tearlament is the only deck that can win going second consistently with only its engine. And that is something that I've been really enjoying about the deck, and I think it's also the reason Tearlament can thrive in an environment of a format that's really diverse and where a lot of different decks get played, because you just play a deck that has a power level that is higher than all of the other decks in the format. So that's why I think we could look at Tearlament. Now, with Droll not being played anymore, and potentially with Shifter and Arisat not being as present in the format anymore, and potentially Kashtira, you know, that's what I personally feel like, and not seeing as much play anymore deeper in the format. So I'm talking about like maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month from now on. I could definitely see a point where Tearlament could be really strong. It might only be a short moment. What I mean by that is that if we see a lot of people playing Kashtira now, because I think it has been established, Kashtira is still very strong. It's probably the best deck still. We see a lot of people starting to play Kashtira, right? Then people will start over-preparing again for Kashtira. But Kashtira is a lot less flexible now than it was before. If people over-prepare for Kashtira, it will go down in popularity because it's not as strong anymore as it was. So it might go down in popularity, and I think that's the point where Tearlament could be at its strongest, and it might just be one tournament that it might be the correct pick. Alright, enough talking. Let's look at a deck list. If I were to play a tournament this weekend, a YCS level tournament, this is the deck list that I would bring. I have worked countless hours on the Tearlament deck. Even after YCS London, where I went 9-3, I bubbled, I sat down and tweaked a few things again. And for the new format, I obviously also sat down. When it comes to Tearlament deck building, the main thing that I want you to take away is that in comparison to other decks like Dragon Link or Sprite, you are not playing with your starting hand. But the most important thing is that when you start playing, you have to go off, right? Your deck has to be so explosive. So the way you do this is by finding cards that are decent draws, right? They have to be decent draws, but they have to be good mills especially. Because if I resolve a Sheeran effect, or if I resolve Tear Cache to mill 3 cards, I want to hit those good cards. I want to hit cards that actually have an impact on the game. I've seen so many Tearlament lists and so many replays on DB Grinder's channel as well, where the Tearlament player, they would have the means to break the board, right? In general, they run over things. They basically, the opponent doesn't have any interruption, and then they mill cards like Foolish Burial Goods, and they mill cards like Kaijus, things that don't do anything in the graveyard, right? And in my opinion, this is the wrong approach to this deck. You want to find cards that fit both roles that are so important for the deck. They have to be good draws, but they also have to be very good mills. Now, it is okay for some cards to only fit one of the roles, right? If you have a card that is an incredible draw for the deck, but it is not that good of a mill, it mitigates that disadvantage that you would get when it gets milled. You know, vice versa as well. If you understand that concept, there is not even that much that I have to go over in terms of ratios for the Tearlament cards, for example. At 3, the Rhino Heart at 3, the Scream at 3, and the Traps, you know, they're not that good a one-card starter. It works with a lot of cards in your hand if you can play. But it also is a mill 2 at worst if it's your only play. And then you just have to pray and hope that you build your deck in the right way so you hit off those off the Tear Cache 2 good cards. So the majority of the deck should be cards that fit both roles. There are a few exceptions. For example, cards that are really good to draw but not that good to mill would be Foolish Burial, This is worth playing because it gets your Ishizu cards in the graveyard. And Diviner. Now Diviner I added recently, and I think it gives the deck do anything in your graveyard. We don't have Sprite Elf anymore, so you know, there's no way to get this back, and there's no fusions that you can make with this. And Super Polymerization is obviously also one of those cards. I have them here, nicely sorted. We have 2 Malicious. This is a level 6 monster, which is very important. The payoffs we play Trivikama. This is a very bad draw, but this is millable of the Beatrice, which we make consistently in this version. And Kelbeck, Guido, Kelto, and Jet Synchron are all incredible mills. We only play 1 Jet Synchron. We don't want a droid. We never want, as well as the King of the Swamp. The danger cards are important because we do play a lot of pay. I don't like the fact that you have to play it. Usually the hands where you brick involve King of the Swamp in some way, where you need it, that you have it in your deck. When it comes to the extra deck, a lot of this has been solved in the past, right? We've talked about the fusions, you know, many times already. The Mud Drag quite a lot. And also it gives you access to the most important card of your deck, Field Spell, Pelorino, right? If you don't have it, but usually that leads to some interruption of some form. A Redoer is mandatory, of course, for the deck. Both okay. I feel like you don't really make them too often, but having the option is nice enough to dish out every possible annoying card that you can think of. It also deals them up after YCS London. Unfortunately, I wanted to find ways to play around evenly matched. Mokia Cash is a water monster. It's level 7, and if you mill the Jet Synchron of you, if you mill it with Beatrice, you're playing Nibiru alongside it, so you can bounce cards. But you know, maybe that's a bit. Especially going second. I don't really make this going first all the time, because usually you make Beatrice if you go first with Diviner, but having this in the side deck, and you have a lot of ways to play without your normal summon. Magnamut and Druid Swarm are just very decent cards. When it's good, it's really good, and you make Beatrice with those cards, so it's nice. Coldbite for Shifter. Now Gameciel and Radian versus Kashtira. The Rysart is still very problematic, and you might even have to sacrifice those 3 slots here in the end for Kashtira as well. I feel like XYZ Encore might also be decent versus Purely. But for now, I play 1 Shuffler versus any deck where it's really good against Runic, for example, 1 Crime and 1 Magical Hound, also for Runic. That's pretty much it. If you want to see gameplay, if that's something you are interested in, starting hands and how to play them out, I would just reference DB Grinder's channel to play certain hands out. Otherwise, just go into solo mode, practice a bit, see what works for you. And if you have any questions, you can definitely leave them in the comment section, of course. I hope that this little rundown of the deck gave you some insight for the upcoming tournament in the next week that you might want to play with this deck. And other than that, hope you enjoyed it, and I see you in the next one. Bye.